Hey guys, Kellen back here with Inside Out Precision. And in the archery world, Christmas comes in November. November is when all the bow companies start releasing their new lineup for the year, and there's always a lot of hype around this. Guys are wondering what's the smoothest bow, the quietest bow, the fastest bow. What changes have they made from the previous year's lineup? Now, I'm not here to tell you that any one bow is going to be the perfect bow for you. They're a lot like shoes. Whatever fits you best and is most comfortable is going to be the bow that you want to shoot. Behind me I have a lot of the new Mathews lineup. We've got the Verdicts, the Traverse, and the new Triax. And there's been a lot of hype around the Verdicts, and last year was the Triax, so there's quite a bit of information out there, but I feel like the Traverse has not been getting quite enough love. It's a very nice bow, and so today we're going to do a little bow review on the Traverse. So this is the new Mathews Traverse. This is in the Ridge Reaper Barren Ground camo. It is 33 inches axle to axle, which to some guys might seem like a long bow, but it's really not by standards in the past a long bow. 5 or 6 years ago, this would have been considered a short bow. This is in their hunting lineup, not their target lineup, but I think this bow would make a really good crossover bow. You could easily take this out in the field. It's compact enough to where it's not going to be getting in your way, hooking on brush. If you need to make a steep downhill angled shot, it's not going to be hitting your leg. And then at the end of the season, you could pull off your hunting gear, slap on a scope and some long bars, and use it as an indoor bow or a 3D bow. It's a really great kind of hybrid crossover bow. As far as the changes that they made from last year's model on the Triax and the previous year on the Halons, the grip is probably the biggest change that I've seen on this. Instead of being a really flat, kind of smooth grip, they increased the angle probably just half a degree, maybe a full degree. But to me, the biggest difference they made is right here in the throat of the grip. In past models, that's been a really shallow little valley right there. And one of the complaints that I had about that grip was that on a hot day, you're sweating, there's a little bit of condensation on your hand, that gets on the grip. The more and more I would shoot, my hand would start slipping further and further up to almost to the point where it was on, right on the very edge of this grip right here. And the problem with that is that it's gonna create a little bit different hold and thus a little bit different point of impact downrange. So they've really fixed that with this. This is it's got a nice shelf right here, so when your hand slides up into that grip, it can't go any higher. It's not gonna move anymore from that. On top of that, they've narrowed the grip up a little bit, which, if you're familiar with target archery at all, most target bows have a real narrow, defined grip. That's because a narrow, defined grip like that is easier to tell if it's in the same place every time. If it's a really big, ergonomical, bulbous grip, it just kind of takes up your whole hand, and it's a little difference in position is harder to feel. So again, you can see here they've narrowed it up. They've even textured the back here a little bit, so if you do get some condensation, or even if it's just raining really hard out when you're hunting, your hand's not going to slip on this grip. I've been shooting this bow a little bit, and I've been really impressed with it. It feels really good in the hand. I don't get a lot of torque side to side with it, and overall I just think it's a major improvement. As far as the technical side of things, it's still the cross-centric cam that they've had on their Halon series and the Triax last year. Those of you who might have done a little research on the Verdicts know that it has the switch mod, which enables you to switch between 60, 65, 70, or 75 pounds just in changing the mod. You don't have to move the limb bolt at all. This particular model does not have the switch mods. It's just your standard module. If you want to change the weight, you have to do it in the limb bolt. Now, one thing I will say that we've noticed on these Mathews is that just one turn off top and bottom limb will change your draw weight almost 5 full pounds, which is a really nice thing for guys that might want to drop this bow down, like I said, to shoot target, where you don't want to be pulling 70 or 72 pounds for 120 arrows. You can back this off just 2 turns and this bow will be at 60 pounds. And typically limbs are most efficient the closer they are to being bottomed out. So in some other bows, you might have to get to 60 pounds, you might have to back that limb out 4 or 5 turns, thus changing the deflection of the limb. That changes your brace height a little bit, changes the overall feel of the bow. With these Mathews, and this stands true for pretty much all their models, you don't have to back this out very far. So you're not changing the specs on the bow hardly at all to decrease the weight, which, you know, if that's what you want to do, that's a good highlight for this bow. They still have the Triax Dampener that they had last year that they came out with in the Triax, and I'm not an engineer by any stance, but the word Triax came from where 3 axes came together. And by putting a dampener right there, it took almost all the vibration out of the bow. For those of you who aren't familiar with Mathews in the past, they've always had a reputation for being a very smooth shooting bow. And this new lineup is smoother than ever. This dampener here is not a gimmick. It actually does its job. Mathews has some of the best engineers out there. And it is truly a dead in the hand bow. This little rubber dampener here hardly weighs anything, but it does help keep that center of gravity low as well. So those things are kind of the new innovation in the last year or so, and it's carried over into this line. Back to the cams a little bit. Mathews, back probably in about 2016, they came out with the Tophat System, which includes an axle that actually bolts in. So it's a hollow axle that bolts in here. So I can remove this end cap here, pull out the axle, and this whole cam will fall out. There's no little C-clips on the end. The reason they did that was because they invented this Tophat system. The Tophat are these little spacers in between the cam and the limb here. And each bow comes with a set of top hats varying from probably 1/4 inch down to just a little sliver, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. And the purpose of those is to be able to shift your cam, this whole harness, right or left between the limbs there. So when you're tuning the bow, the idea is that you never have to move your rest out of center shot, and you can influence the tune of the arrow or how that arrow is coming out of the bow just by moving the cam right or left. Mathews doesn't have yokes, traditional yokes, like let's say a Hoyt would, where you can put a twist or a twist out in either side and lean the cam. You're actually just moving the entire cam right to left. It's a very effective way of tuning. I've set up 150 of these bows probably in the last year. Last year the Triax was by far our best-selling bow, and everybody that works here was extremely impressed with how easy it was to tune up for customers. Even guys that didn't have perfect form, usually within 3 or 4 shots, you could get this bow shooting a perfect bullet hole. So it's a really effective system for tuning. Just overall, I think it's a pretty good looking bow. It's got a little less reflex in the riser than, let's say, the Halon series or this year's Verdicts or the Triax. You know, you look at the target side of things, traditionally bows have a little less reflex. They tend to have the reputation of aiming a little better. Now, I'm not saying that's true for everybody, but that's just a generalization with the shape of a riser. So a really, really cool bow made by Mathews, but the goal of this is to bring you what this bow can just do by the numbers. Like I said, whether this bow feels good to me really has nothing to do with how it performs. So for those of you who are wondering how fast it shoots, we've got a chronograph set up over here. This particular bow is set up at 29.5 inches. I'll do another review at 28.5 inches with it. And I've got arrows ranging from 404 grains all the way up to 515 grains. This bow IBOs at 338 feet a second. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what IBO, the IBO rating is, it's basically the international standard speed rating. And lots of guys expect when they get the bow that it's going to shoot that fast, but it's a little misleading because the IBO is done with a 30-inch draw length, which is by far longer than an average draw length. Most guys are going to be in that 27.5 to 29 range. And it's done with a 350 grain arrow, which is extremely light for any hunting purposes. I would never recommend hunting with a 350 grain arrow. And it's done at 70 pounds, which 70 pounds is pretty standard for guys hunting these days, but there's a lot of people who are only going to pull 60 or 62 or 64. So it's typically going to shoot slower than what it's rated at. But nonetheless, some bows are more efficient than others when you get a heavy arrow in them versus a light arrow. So we're going to shoot these number of arrows through the bow, show you the chronograph. want to be as unbiased as possible with what this bow is capable of. So I've got a chronograph set up over here. I'm gonna go grab a release and let's let this baby bark. All right, so I'm here at the chronograph. We're gonna be testing the Mathews Traverse. And again, this bow is set at 70 pounds. It's at 29.5 inches. And the first arrow I'm gonna be testing is an Axis 300. This is almost full length. It's cut at 32 inches. So it's a heavy arrow. It's actually coming in right at 515 grains. So for those of you who like to shoot a real heavy arrow, hopefully this will give you a bit of an idea of what this bow can do with a heavy arrow. Again, I'm not here to say that this bow is any better or worse from the speed it shoots. I just want to do this by the numbers and try to give you an idea of what these bows are capable of. So I've got my chronograph set up here, got my arrow nocked. Let's see what the first result is. So that came in at 272 feet a second, which for a 15 grain arrow, that's moving pretty good. That's gonna have a lot of kinetic energy. That's gonna, whatever it hits, it's gonna penetrate really well. The next arrow I have this is actually one of my personal arrows. This is a 485 grain. It's the 6mm FMJ. So it's not as long as that Axis arrow, but its overall weight is still pretty high. So again, 486 grains, 29.5 inches, 70 pounds. And this bow IBO's at 338. So 275, so only a couple feet a second difference actually, which is pretty impressive that it's that efficient with that heavy of an arrow, with the 515 grain arrow. So the next arrow we have here, this is an Axis 300, but it's cut shorter. This arrow's coming in right at 445 grains, so kind of that middle range. This is probably the most common weight that guys are gonna be shooting for hunting. Most guys seem to have the best luck between 425 and 450 grains. So this is a really common weight that we see coming through the shop here. So let's see what it does with this. So 282, so we jumped up, that was about a 40 grain difference, and we jumped up almost 10 feet, 8 feet a second. So now we're gonna move to what I would consider a fairly light arrow for hunting. This is a 404 grain Axis. It's a 340, but it's cut pretty short. So this is cut at 27.5 inches, I believe. So this would be a little lighter arrow than I would probably shoot for hunting, but again, that's total personal preference. I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there that have shot a lot of stuff with a 400 grain arrow. So let's see some speed here. So 294, so pretty big jump there. So a little under 300 feet a second. Pretty much right where I expected it to be. What I did like about that was that with the 515 grain arrow to a 486 grain arrow, there was almost zero speed difference. So it's a very efficient bow with a heavy arrow like that. There's been a big trend recently in guys that like to shoot a lot of weight. It gives you more kinetic energy. It's the difference between throwing a ping pong ball and a baseball at something. In baseball, traveling the same speed is gonna hit a lot harder than a ping pong ball will. So that's good news for guys that like to shoot a heavy arrow. You're gonna get a lot of good penetration with that. 272 is by no means a really fast arrow, but it's plenty of speed to shoot anything you need to. It's gonna have a flat enough trajectory that you're not gonna hit a bunch of limbs if they're 2 or 3 feet above, what you're aiming at 40 yards. And it's just a solid speed out of a bow like this. So the brace height on this is 6 5/8 inches. It's over half an inch longer than what the Verdicts and the Triax are. So to be able to get that kind of speed with a brace height like that is pretty impressive. So I'm gonna go throw some 28.5 inch mods on here. That seems to be the most common draw length that we see coming through the shop here. Most guys are in that 28 to 29 inch range. So I wanna give you guys an idea, for those of you who might be a little shorter draw length than I am, the speed difference between 29.5 and 28.5. So I'm gonna go throw some mods on and we'll get back at it. All right guys, so we're back with the 28.5 inch mods on here. I do want to mention that these are the 85% let-off mods. It does come with a 75% option, but this whole test has been done with the 85% mods. So again, 28.5 inches, 70 pounds. This is a 515 grain arrow. The first shot with this at 29.5 inches was 272. So let's see what the difference is with an inch shorter draw length. .260, so pretty considerable. That dropped 12 whole feet a second with an inch of draw. So still not horrible speed, probably a little slower than most guys would want to shoot, but still not bad. So let's see what the 486 grain arrow does. Now remember at 29.5 inches, there was only a 3 foot a second difference between this and the 515 grain arrow. So again, 486, 70 pounds, 28.5 inches. .268, so a little higher increase in speed with the 8 feet a second with the 486. So still not bad. Let's grab, this is the 444 grain arrow, 443 grain arrow. Let's see what this one does. This one came in at 282 last time. So we'll see what it drops to here. .274, so about 8 feet a second. So the trend seems to be anywhere from 8 to 12 feet a second with these. So let's grab this arrow. So this is a Axis 400 coming in at 404 grains. Again, 70 pounds, 28.5 inches. .293. So last time this was at 294, so there was hardly any difference in speed with a 400 grain arrow in this. So pretty efficient cam system. I'm fairly impressed with those speeds. Like I said, it's not a speed demon by any means, but that's really good speed for heavy arrows like that. So I hope this gave you guys a little bit of a view as to what these bows can do. And again, I'm not saying that this is the bow for you. I'm just trying to do this by the numbers. If you have any other bows or arrows that you would like me to review, whether it be with this bow and a different arrow or a different bow with the same arrows or a combination of the two, please feel free to comment below. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, precision is a decision.